So how about we start and you just take me through it in your own words, what you think is the things you want me to be most aware of. And I've got a few things I'd like to ask too, which I can do at the appropriate time as we go through.
Okay, so I think the one thing that really is what I'm passionate about, and that's recovery focused. I sort of fell into peer work. I went back and studied as a mature adult when I was 43 years of age. I didn't even know there was a peer workforce. I just thought I had an opportunity to give something back in community mental health. And when I sort of finished my qualification, I managed to get a job pretty much straight away, and then, was aware that there was a peer workforce, and I've been really proactive in building a network of people in the workforce and made some great contacts over the years. And I think the fact that I champion recovery, and I just believe that if I can be doing what I'm doing now, 23 years after being so unwell, then why can't the next person? So that's sort of what drives me what I do.
So Rick, would it help if you just, I obviously it was a pretty traumatic time that you had in your beginning of your mental health journey and your diagnosis and all of the events, but and I really want to come and spend time on your peer worker role, but that when you reflect on that, because it's helpful for us as the Commission to think about what would you do different and what would we need to do differently in a system, but it was a pretty significant journey you had, and so would you be able to just articulate a bit for me about what that was like for you as a young 26-year-old, realising you had a serious problem and then how it unfolded? And I'm interested to know how helpful were the psychiatrists and the mainstream mental health service along that way, or what, I know you found other supports in your community, which I'd love to talk about too, but in that, when you were first diagnosed and things must have been so terribly difficult, I noted you said you wished the system had been more humane. So are you happy to spend a bit of time with that before we go to peer work?
Sure. So I think what was really, I just had no idea about mental health at all until I became unwell. And there was a few factors in my life that led to me becoming unwell pretty much overnight. Like I looking back, I feel like I started acting sort of out of my usual self for maybe a period of a couple of weeks prior to being hospitalised. But I had a night where I'd had my flatmate hold a knife to my throat. I was under a lot of pressure to be forced to do something that I felt was going to lead me to, and pretty much being jailed. Yeah. So there was a bunch of factors that sort of led to me being unwell. The night I had the knife held to my throat, I just fled into the night. To get to my mother's rural property, I had to cross the Westgate Bridge. The only way I could do that was on foot because I'd had a car accident a couple of weeks earlier. I think when I got arrested on the Westgate Bridge, the police thought that I was going to jump off the bridge, which I had no intention of doing. I think when I said that I was trying to walk 170 kilometres to my mum's house, they thought I was crazier than if I'd actually said that I was going to jump. So look, that first night, I was then assessed by a doctor, and sort of later into the early hours of the next morning, I was laying on a bed when in burst 6 doctors and nurses. They physically held me down, then and restrained me, then chemically restrained me. I presume I woke up the next day. I was in isolation, and I was in isolation there for another 2 or 3 days. I wasn't told where I was, why I was being held. So you can imagine how traumatic that is, just from being on, like everyone else on the street, being able to do what you do in the community, to then being held against your will and forced to take medication. That's foreign to you as well. So look, that first hospitalisation, when I did get out into the general public of the psychiatric hospital, that was an eye-opener. You had people talking to you as calmly as I'm talking to you now, and the next minute they're screaming at a wall, screaming at somebody, nobody. It's just really confronting. And I had no insight into how unwell I was. it was what I was thinking, and the way I was talking and acting, it was real to me. Like, the experience was real to me. I had legitimate reasons to think the way I was thinking, even though I was out of touch with reality. I was delusional. It was my reality. And so to then be told that there's something wrong with you, and you know, you're in amongst a crowd of people where they've obviously got mental health issues, it's really hard to describe just how chalk and cheese it became in a few days. And so, you know, when I was let out back into the care of the person that had held the knife to my throat, because I was basically homeless, I had nowhere to go but back to him, and that was a better alternative than being in hospital. I realised that I couldn't stay there, and so then I found my way back to my mum's house, and the CAT team were involved because I was making phone calls to 000 for no apparent reason. I just had this fascination with numbers, and you know, it was just like, it was just chaotic. My whole mind was just, I just couldn't turn the thoughts off.
So is it, Rick, fair to say that when you were discharged, you were still obviously pretty unwell, even when you left hospital that first time? So that's something that's quite challenging, isn't it? I mean, the whole experience was very traumatic, but then clearly you were discharged when you were still probably quite seriously ill. And that would have, yeah. So that's something we are trying to look at from the system, because without those supports in place, and when before you're stable, you're still very much at risk then too.
And the thing is, they sent me home with some medication to take, but when you're a 28-year-old adult who's never had a health issue in your life, and they say, well, look, we're going to send you home and we want you to take this medication, I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with me, and I'm a fit and healthy adult, so why am I going to take this medication? So I wasn't going to take the medication, and I didn't take the medication. The second time I found myself back down in Melbourne at the same hospital, things changed again. Like, I wasn't going to be released until I had somewhere to go that was an alternative to my ex-flatmate. My mum had been interstate and we'd had a strained relationship. So mum was contacted. She came down to the hospital. She basically was resistant to taking me in, which meant I was homeless. And so the psychiatrist and I had a chat, and I stated that I would have been homeless if mum doesn't take me in. So the psychiatrist talked mum around. I fronted the mental health review board as it was then. I was put on a 12-month CTO and released into my mother's care. So at least I had that protective factor of being with my mum, which was one thing. But yet again, I was released and told that this time around I had to take a depot shot every fortnight. And I was really resistant to that. I mean, mum would take me over religiously every fortnight. But it's embarrassing to be in the doctor's office, have to drop your pants in front of him. He gives you a depot injection, you walk out, you do that every fortnight for a year. I didn't like the doctor for the treatment he was giving me. I didn't want the treatment that I was getting. You know, so it's just like I was unwell, but I didn't realise I was that unwell. And look, as I said in the statement, I'm grateful now for the intervention. It had to happen when it happened, but because it's such a foreign thing to what any normal person was used to, going to that, you can see why people are resistant to treatment.
Yeah, so Rick, can you just, when you were doing that, so it was a very powerful, reading it now, hearing you talk about it, it was very powerful to have that understanding of why people might have been resistant, and if they didn't really understand. When you talked about going to get your injections, etc., where did you actually go? Was it a mental health service or a general practice or a hospital? Where would you have to go every 2 weeks that your mum took you?
Yeah, just to my GP.
So what about helping you to understand your diagnosis of schizophrenia and how to manage your health and well-being? Who gave you all of the other supports, or your mum? Was it only the GP, or were there other people involved with you then in the health system?
So I had a person from the area mental health who came over every, well, look, it was probably a week to begin with, might have been a fortnight. She was like an outreach worker. We'd sit on mum's veranda drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, and she'd try and tell me that I had a future and I could not see a future for myself. To begin with, I wasn't diagnosed with schizophrenia. Obviously, the symptoms of schizophrenia have to be there for 6 months or longer to have that diagnosis, as you would be well aware. So, yes, I was psychotic and delusional and exhibited all the traits of having schizophrenia. So, I mean, I just can't remember anything about being told what having schizophrenia meant. All I was told that I did have a future, but I couldn't see that future. And so I don't think I ever had any education around what having schizophrenia meant, what the symptoms were, what I was going through. Mum, poor old mum, like I look back now and for her to have had to deal with me on her own. I mean, there was no carers network when she was supporting me. Neither of us knew how to get that support, what support looked like. Outreach workers can only do so much. So, look, I don't know what's changed much now, but yeah, there was just no sort of system of or education. And so we just learned as we went. And really it took from the time I became unwell until the time I was well enough to return to work, 5 years had gone by. And for the best part of those 5 years, I was unwell.
Sorry, pretty powerful in your statement when you talked about the fact it was your local policeman who suggested to your cricket club. Were you involved in that cricket club before you got sick, that he would have suggested they reach out to you, or that was just something that happened?
Yeah, so
Pretty powerful.
Yeah, I'd played cricket when I'd lived elsewhere in Victoria, and the policeman had become a friend of Mum's. Yeah, he knew I had an interest in cricket, and he asked a couple of the stalwarts of the cricket club to come out and pay me a visit. And look, we laugh now, and look, I don't like to make light of mental health issues, but the story goes that they were on their way driving out. Mobile phones had only just been invented, so there wasn't much mobile phone service there, and they're thinking, well, who's this hillbilly that we're going out to visit, and he's completely unwell according to the policeman. What are we getting ourselves into? And so yeah, they came out, and for that first year they would pick me up on a Saturday. Mum would pick me up sort of after cricket on the Saturday night. Like we'd go back to the pub and have a couple of beers and a meal and whatnot. But yeah, they came out for an entire season and picked me up and sort of got me to the cricket club. There were periods of time when I was hospitalised and went missing for a couple of weeks. And look, I don't know, Mum sort of has only just divulged that she did tell the boys at reasonably early on what was going on with me. She didn't tell me that until, as I said, just recently. So I didn't know that they knew much about what was going on. And really, in those early days, I don't think Mum knew what was going on other than I was really unwell. So, look, it's a credit to the individuals that they took the chance, came out. As I said in the statement, the only thing I could say for the entire season was $2.50 thanks every time I sold a beer. I didn't say anything, communicate. I'd lost my whole, it was like I'd lost my soul. I just was a shell of the person that I was. I had a frown for over a year that I couldn't get rid of, and no affect. It was just, yeah, terrible.
Some of that, I thought it was very powerful the way you described that, and the importance of friendship and care. And you also mentioned another good friend you've obviously got who you've had in your life. But I was really, you also described quite well the impact of that flat affect, that feeling you had. Was that linked to the medication? You said it was also, you put on a lot of weight that was obviously linked. So was that flatness you felt, do you think that was because of your mental illness or also a side effect of your medication?
I think it was, I would say it's more to do with the medication. But then, yeah, over the time, I think when you become once I got the diagnosis of schizophrenia, so we're talking sort of the next year into 1998, I'm probably towards the end of 1998, still on the depot injection. By then, I'd lost all hope in having a future, and that's when sort of the clinical depression started to come in. So then you're trialled on different medication again, like you're on antidepressants and your depot, and it's just a cocktail of medication. And look, I'm not a doctor. but sometimes I wonder whether psychiatry actually knows what the combination of these medications, the effect it has on people. And look, I'm not anti-medication. I still take a olanzapine tablet today, and I will be taking it for the rest of my life. When the penny finally dropped that I would have to take medication, at least I had a proactive psychiatrist that didn't medicate me to the eyeballs. So there's a whole factor of things that go into someone actually becoming well and managing their mental illness.
It was very powerful when the thing that triggered you to say, I have got a road to recovery and I'm going to set those goals that you talked about. And the first one was you're losing 25 kilos, which was pretty impressive, I must say, because we know for so many people that link between their mental illness, their medication, their lifestyle leads to the obesity and the lack of physical activity and the health consequences that all keep running together. But can you talk a little bit to me about that thing that triggered you to say, no, I'm going to move forward and start on my recovery journey? And sorry, Rick, for the noisy grandchildren in the background. COVID's got us in a very crowded house now, so sorry about that. I hope they don't disrupt us.
No, it's okay. So look, I think to me, it's very hard to put a time frame on exactly the way things went, but like, after I sort of attempted to take my own life, and with Mum's intervention, that didn't happen. So, you know, that afternoon I flopped on the bed and I was angry and, you know, but then it was like I had a bit of an epiphany that if I'd managed to take my own life, like I'm an only child, so Mum would have lived another 30 odd years, 40 years, you know, I was a really sad individual. And that sort of dawned on me in a way I made a deal with myself on that day. And it was to basically say that, okay, even though I'm in a huge amount of pain, like mental torture, just, you know, out and out, downright misery, that I couldn't inflict that on my mother. So I decided, I made a deal with myself that while Mum stayed alive, I would stay alive. And if Mum had died a week later, I wouldn't be here. But, you know, the thing is that days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years. And, you know, over that period of time, like after that suicide attempt, I was hospitalised, and I vowed and declared that I really didn't want this to be my life, just a revolving door of hospitalisations. You know, I'd say in the statement that the psychiatrist basically threatened me with ECT, that they'd exhausted all avenues of treatment for my depression. And so it was a combination of things, that there was never just one thing that sort of led me out of the wilderness. It was a series of things. And so making that deal, you know, to myself with regards to Mum, you know, led to me to think, okay, so even though I feel like I'm in a prison and I'm in the community, but I'm in a prison, you know, what am I going to do to sort of, you know, do something proactive? And then when the psychiatrist threatens you with ECT, you say, what can I bring back to the table and show them that, you know, I've turned the corner? And so the obvious thing was to say, righto, I'm going to lose weight. And so I set myself a year to lose the weight. I wasn't just going to do it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. It was a goal. And so I sat on the couch watching the Sydney Olympics, and after that 2 weeks, that was when my routine of changing my diet around and doing a bit of exercise sort of came about. And you know, when I said to the guys at the cricket club that I had set a goal of a year's time, and the next grand final day, like we always used to get together and watch the grand final, so I had long hair, and I said, right, when I lose the weight, I'll half time of that next grand final, you can shave my hair off and it's going to be like a new beginning. And so over the period of that year, like as it was obvious that I was losing weight, you know, the cricketers, they bought into it and they really encouraged me to keep going. And, you know, so it's amazing how like little things sort of just come in a sequence and things just turned around. But one of the more powerful things, and look, I'm not knocking day programs, I know there's a lot of people with mental health issues that was their social connection, but I was taken there once and I looked around and I thought, you know, this is not for me. Like, I don't relate to these people. You know, maybe I just couldn't see how unwell I was at that time, but I just didn't see me as being one, you know, a person that would need that sort of sort of socialisation. Like I had the cricket club, I had just the general community to engage in, and that's what I wanted to get back to. And look, I think it's really important, and part of the peer work is that, you know, my journey is only my journey. For some people, they've had trauma from as a child, and they haven't known anything else but chaos and mental health, you know, even as a young child. Whereas I was 28 years of age, and I had a life to strive back to get towards. And
I think that was very powerful, Rick, in terms of what you said in that. It was about, but you had to get to a pretty low point in your life, you're saying then, and not coping very well with your illness and how you were feeling, and having that sense of despair and lack of hope, I guess. And it did, when I read it, it was really like there was a combination of the threat of the ECT, which you described why you didn't want it and what you'd seen with other people who'd had it. And then that, as well as being suicidal and realising the seriousness of just how desperate you were feeling, but the capacity to dig deep and, you know, have that personal resilience and resolve, making that deal with yourself, sounds like that was very important also, that you came to an agreement with yourself about how you were going to approach it. And we're trying to think about in our system, how do you make sure more people have that opportunity? Because you fortunately were able to engage with that cricket club, which was pretty important to give you a grounding and some support outside your mum and the broader community. So it was very powerful to see, but it was sad to see you had to get to that really acutely distressed state for it then the path forward to really become apparent.
And I think, you know, what I do now as a peer worker, and may have not made any difference, but I think if someone had actually been able to sit down on mum's veranda and say, look, our journeys are different, but I have that empathy because I've been through something similar. And here I am 20 years later doing what I'm doing. Like, that's the power in what I do now.
Yeah.
Okay, people with mental health issues, their story is always going to be different. But you share that common bond of having that understanding. And so maybe I might not have had to have got to the lowest point before turned around. And I think that's the power in what I do, and the motivating and the mentoring and the role modelling that peer support offers, that I could have, if I'd been able to mentor my own self, it would have been that, look, things can turn around. And you know, my mate who I talked about that used to come up from Melbourne, like, he's fairly religious, and you know, he would say to me, God's got a plan for you, and I just couldn't see it. And that was his way of trying to dig me out of the hole, and just, you know, he believed that I had a future. And you know, but if I'd had someone physically there who said, I've actually been through something similar and there is a way out, maybe things would have been different and turned around a lot quicker.
So we'll come to that, and I'm really interested in now what you're doing. But could you, when you said it took you 5 years from when you got ill and to get back to work, were you involved in the caring world in your previous role in life, or was this something very different to what you had seen yourself doing work-wise before you became sick?
So I'm a plumber by trade.
Oh, right. Well, maybe caring, but of a different type.
The funny thing is, and I, like, even when I was really unwell, and probably even in that first year, I'd sit on mum was on a 20-acre country property with a lot of trees around and a dam that was out the front of the house block. And I had this vision that I was going to build units and have people who are unwell come and stay in these units, and it was going to be a therapeutic intervention. And so I had this weird vision that I was going to be helping people even back then. So I had no inclination to do that other than that, you know, sort of train of thought. And I certainly didn't imagine that I was going to be doing what I was doing. I think, like, when I got back to work, I worked at a sheet metal factory. I was shed building. I then went back plumbing, even though I'd sat on mum's veranda and said, I'm never going plumbing again. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it isn't going to be that. And I ended up doing that. And then I was just working as a maintenance guy at one of the local wineries, and I just wasn't satisfied. And I was in Ballarat one day and thought I'll call into the university and see what's available. And my outreach worker from Women Uniting Care, I rang him and said, look, if I get into this line of work and go and study, you know, what should I do? And he said, look, I'd go and get a Cert 4 in AOD or mental health or something and get that minimum qualification. So we didn't contact each other all that regularly. So I did, I waited 12 months until I knew I'd passed the course, and he'd moved up over the years to like one of the general managers there at Wimmera Uniting Care. And so when I rang him 12 months later and said, look, I took your advice and I went and got a qualification, I think he nearly fell off his chair. But he then offered me a job at Wimmera Uniting Care as a consumer consultant. And so I used to travel up there. I'd stay with my mentor, and he was my mentor for 3 years working up there. I stayed 2 nights a week at his place while I was working up there. And yeah, he was a great mentor to me in learning the role and what the industry looked like and peer support. And look, Wimmera Uniting Care were really proactive in encouraging me just to my own role and put my own stamp on things.
So were you their first peer support worker? I mean, it's an interesting journey. You're saying really you get on with your life. Obviously your mental illness was under control. You were managing it, you were working, and then you make that visit to the university and start from there. It's pretty amazing that you got into the peer work and on that journey. But had you met any peer workers by then, or were you the...
No. As I said earlier, I didn't even know there was a peer workforce, but I got a job as a consumer consultant, and that was primarily to run a peer support group. There was another peer worker in the FAMS program there at Wimmera Uniting Care. So when I walked in the door and was introduced to her, we sort of had that bond straight away. Okay, we're both peer workers, and yeah, we're still friends to this day. And yeah, so I then, it was only that, I think it was back in 2000 and what would that have been, 14, that the Department of Health and Human Services were holding meetings with the peer workforce. It was a dialogue between the department and the peer workforce. And yeah, we became aware of that. So we'd actually travelled down from Horsham in one day, sort of up and back, to attend these dialogues with the department. And yeah, you walk into a room and there's 60 other peer workers, and it's like, okay, well, wow, there's an industry, a whole sort of workforce there. So yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opener. But right from then, I just realised that networking was an important part of the role that I undertook. You know, I then became aware of VIMIAC and, you know, walked into the doors there, and it just felt like a family environment. And yeah, so sort of it's now 7 years later, you know, I've built quite a network of people, colleagues, you know, throughout different organisations, and yeah, I've had wonderful opportunities. You know, I've presented at THEMS conferences and done all sorts of stuff. So yeah, it's just I'm still pinching myself that I'm here doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, that's a fabulous journey that you've been on. And I think you said earlier that if someone in your personal experiences had been available as a peer worker to give you a sense of hope and that recovery was possible and had that insight, it would have been really helpful. And I presume you're now doing that. I was very interested in the work that you're doing. So can you just describe a bit about, in addition to your network, clearly you were involved in the co-design, some of the new initiatives that are up and going. Can you just talk a little bit about what you felt was most important in the work that you've been doing as a peer worker?
So I think the one thing that really resonated with me when I started working with clients and as a peer worker, you know, when you say to someone that, look, I'm a peer worker, that means that I have a lived experience, I have my own mental health issues. You know, people just sort of relax and they, okay, you sort of get where I'm coming from. And, you know, then when you start talking to people and you start role modelling what recovery looks like to me, and like, you don't just tell your entire story to someone, you just use bits and pieces of it as you get to know that person. But, you know, it's really strange when people actually sort of realise that things can turn around for them. You can see that it's like the little ember in their eyes. it's something that, you know, when that happens, you think, right, I've got through to this person that they do have a future, and whatever that future looks like for them is fine. That doesn't have to be work. It can be volunteering. It can be joining an art group. It can be whatever it, you know, means to them. But, you know, when they actually see hope, and I think that's the one thing that, you know, when you are unwell and, you know, at the depths of despair, you know, if you wake up in the morning and you don't see any hope for yourself and you don't see a future for yourself, then, you know, you're really struggling. And if you can offer that to someone and say, right, I believe in you, that you have a future. Yeah, I've done the hard work and I know how hard it is. And I've done the hard yards and here I am today. But if you want to do the hard work and dig yourself out of the hole that you're in, you know, I can assist you in, you know, what limitations I can. But if you're prepared to do the hard work, you know, your future can look bright, and you will have whatever, you know, you set out and work towards doing. And that's the powerful thing, I think, that, you know, I do motivate people. And I think one of the things, there's a fine balance between, you know, motivating someone, but also challenging someone, because, you know, you have to get out to actually move forward. And there's that's an art form in peer work. And look, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but I seem to have that knack of being able to draw that fine line. Some people say I'm very direct, and I don't make any apologies for that. But, you know, I've got a good sense of humour. I'm a knockabout sort of a bloke. I've been around the block a bit, you know, so I relate to people and they relate to me, and you can have that honest conversation. And yeah, it is hard work for people, but you can do it. And
how do you, sorry, Rick, how do you look after your own mental health while you, so there's two issues I'm interested in that environment where you're providing all that support. How do you look after your own mental health? And then I want to ask you something about carers, but let's, in terms of looking after yourself, because it's pretty demanding, no doubt. Sometimes you'll be dealing with people in all sorts of distressing circumstances. So how do you balance that?
So I think it's just a work-life balance. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, I do take medication every day that keep the symptoms under control. I have a work-life balance. I don't work full-time. I only work part-time.
Yeah.
You know, I've had my partner now. We've been together for 12 years. And on the first night that we met, I said to her, look, I live a stress-free life.
Don't add to my stress.
I've been in a few relationships where, you know, it causes stress in your life. I said, look, I'm past that. You know, let's just be honest and upfront with each other, and, you know, communicate with each other. And, you know, we've hardly had a crossword in 12 years. And so I don't have any stress in life. I, you know, minimize the stress in my life, you know, everything that I do. And yeah, look, I think the thing, the beauty about working in community mental health is your good days are really good and your bad days are really bad, but they're few and far between. There's a lot in the middle where, you know, you just go about your business and do your job, and, you know, you get people moving forward. And yeah, it's the majority of it is in that middle bit where, you know, you're not getting stress at work and you're not dealing with acutely unwell people. And, you know, the Connecting to Community program wasn't sort of designed to be working with the acutely unwell. It was for those people that were at the point in their life that they wanted to make a change, but they just weren't, you know, maybe they didn't have the confidence, or there was anxiety or something like that that's in the way, preventing them from, you know, sort of stepping out and out of their comfort zone. And the peer work is there to sort of assist them to do that.
And so, Rick, you said when you started on your peer work journey, you had a good mentor. You had someone who's you're still work closely with. Are you now mentoring other people? Are you now also playing a role with new peer support workers coming into the system?
Yeah, so Connecting to Community, we have two peer workers that work directly. Like I'm the senior peer worker here at Ballarat Community Health. So we have two peer workers in the Connecting to Community program here in Ballarat, and we have a peer worker working out of the Horsham office of Grampians Community Health that's also in the consortium. So yeah, and look, we're in the office, well, when we're back to normality, we're generally in the office at least 2 days a week altogether. And yeah, I just provide that mentorship to them.
And when you talked about your own journey, you talked about how tough it must have been for your mum. When you think about peer work, Do you think people with lived experience like you can also provide a valuable support to carers, or do you think they need to have a separate network? I'm trying to work out, can you be a peer worker supporting both someone with a lived experience and a carer, or what do you think about those two roles and responsibilities?
I think there's definitely a separation that needs to be there. Mum would obviously have a completely different take on her view of events that happened, and how she managed to do that. Yeah, how she managed to do that on her own is just unbelievable. But yeah, I don't think as someone who's living through that mental illness is the right fit for the carers. I think they do, like, if carers should have their own peer support workers in that way, and that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And so then when you talked about obviously you did a lot of that co-design work, and I think you explained in your statement it took you about 12 months to come up with what you thought was the co-design of the new model that you're now working in Ballarat. Is there anything particularly important in that you think we need to be mindful of? It was obviously a good process over a long period of time, so it wasn't just a short exercise.
Look, definitely, like the General Manager of Social Support here at Ballarat Community Health, she just deserves so much credit for creating an environment, an authorising environment to go out, and have a go, not trying to preempt the outcomes of where we were trying to get to. We were on the path of co-design before we even knew what we were doing. Like, we held a speak out where we invited the community to come along and tell us what was important to them in their mental health journey. And so it was a very informal day. A few weeks later, I was at the time involved in the Consumer Workforce Development Group with the Department of Health and Human Services. So the department offered us to undertake co-design training. So when there were 7 of us from Ballarat Community Health, I went down on the day, and there was, I think, about 6 other organisations there as well. And so as the day unfolded, we realised that we were on the path to co-design, we just didn't know what we were doing. And so, when we sort of got back and thought, well, okay, what's the next step? We asked the Australian Centre for Social Innovation to sort of mentor us through this process, and they were really great. And we'd have phone hookups and the odd video hookup, and they sort of stepped us through that sort of 12 to 18 month period of prototyping, connecting to community, and the whole process. But without Ballarat Community Health sort of being proactive and really being person-centred, I don't think we would have created the program. And the fact there was, like, my role in Partners in Recovery, part of that was to come up and design a program. So it's not, we didn't have a budget and we didn't have a time frame other than when Partners in Recovery was to finish due to the funding ceasing. So I'd never felt under any pressure to actually have a deadline and stick to a budget, and so there was no pressure. It was just like, well, let's go on a journey and see where that unfolds. And look, I'm still pinching myself now that the PHN, the Westvic PHN, looked at our model and thought that it sounded like a great way of getting people out into their community and improving their mental health. And it's a wonderful journey. And like, for my general manager to say that it's one of the highlights of her career doing, what we did, it's obviously the highlight of my career as well. So, I mean, we just had such, it's enjoyment, pleasure, we'd have weekly catch-up meetings, and sometimes I'd walk in the next week and say, what we talked about last week, I've been thinking about it, and I don't see that working. I think we should go down a different path. And, we'd sit there and we'd laugh, and it was just a really fun environment to be in. And, to have a general manager and a peer worker and anyone else that could be involved in the project, just being able to have their say and be an equal partner in the scheme of things is just a great environment to be in. And co-design, it's just when you embrace it and actually involve the people that you're trying to deliver the service to, if you're not doing that, well, then you shouldn't be providing the service, because people are the experts in their own lives and they really should have a seat at the table.
Yes, and I'm going to come on to governance in a second, but Rick, I was interested in the service that you designed. At the end of it, you've said it's important it's not a long-term support for individuals, you know, and I think you differentiated earlier when you talked about the fact that, you know, day centres had a place maybe for some people, but you're clearly in the design of your new service saying we're there to provide support and transition back to community, not to be the long-term alternative to those communities. Can you just speak to us a little bit about why that was important from your point of view?
For some people, there probably isn't the opportunity for them to participate in the community as they would like, and to me, that's really the minority. For most people, the community is the resource. And I don't see why anyone shouldn't be participating in the community how they want to. We're all citizens of the community, and having a mental health issue shouldn't stop anyone contributing to being an active member of their community. That's the way I feel. And to me, I've sort of seen services be involved with people for long term, like 3-4 years, taking people out for coffee. I've had acquaintances be clients of services where someone's taken them out for coffee, and 5 years later they're doing the same thing and they haven't moved forward in the issues of their life. And to me, that's just not right. In the old block funding days, when services had billable hours, and so the more hours they spent with the client, the more money they got. To me, that's just not a recipe that works, because people become reliant on the service and they don't move forward. So this intervention that we provide, and part of that has been through my own experience, services came and went as need be. Like even my mentor from Wimmera Uniting Care, he was only there for 12 months. And then he moved on, and that service ceased, and I was on my own, because the presumption was that I had moved forward enough to be able to take that next step. And so I don't make any excuses for the fact of saying, look, we can still work in maybe a 3 to 6 month time frame. Like, it doesn't have to be a fortnightly visit setting or like session set in stone. But we're not there for the long term, and we just need to get you towards your goal. If we can get you to achieve your goal, that's great. But even if you're on the path to your goal, and your goal is going to take that bit longer, but you've built the confidence and you've moved on and you're on the right track, then we take a step back and you don't need us anymore. And for most people, personally, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is a fairly severe and persistent mental health issue. When I got into this role, I didn't realise how prevalent depression and anxiety were. And I'm not diminishing the debilitating parts that plays, in someone's life. But when it comes to, the anxiety of meeting new people and walking into a room, if we can get the peer worker just breaking the ice, getting someone, into a room full of people, and with the peer support group that I ran in Horsham, the worker that might have had the client would come to that first meeting and break the ice and get the person through the door. And then the person, at least was sort of eased into the situation where they just weren't walking into a room full of strangers. So, I think I'm passionate about growing the peer workforce, obviously being on that development group with the department. The fact that we've actually managed to grow the peer workforce and create a program that doesn't make people reliant on the service for a long period of time, I think it's a great model.
And I certainly like the fact you talked about it. Part of the recovery is to get people's lives back on track. Before I took on this role, I was chairing the Transport Accident Commission, and that's very much about how do you help people get their lives back on track, and that whole focus of how do you get people back engaged with community and still getting all the supports they need, but back as part of that community, I think is a fundamental philosophy that's important. And clearly you've embraced that with the work that you've been doing and the approach that your service has. When you talk about the team at this service that you were talking about, can you just give me a sense of who do you think is important that's involved in that team, the type of model that you have now at Ballarat?
So in the Connecting to Community team, do you mean? Yeah, so we have our manager of our adult mental health service that sort of oversees the Connecting to Community program. We, as part of the funding from the Connecting to Community program, we have the two peer workers. We have an intensive support worker and we have a COS worker for the people who have been rejected from the NDIS. But still need ongoing support. So that's sort of our team, aside from our forensic mental health and community health mental health team. So yeah, so we've gone from having a couple of partners in recovery workers to now a really vibrant adult mental health team in the space of sort of the 3 years that I've been here. So yeah, we're really expanding Ballarat Community Health. They want to make a difference in the community and provide a great mental health service to as many people as possible. So yeah, I think Connecting to Community was a great starting point. And what the future looks like, you know, there's possibilities for us to expand our mental health team into the future, hopefully, and Connecting to Community can just play that part. And I understand that there are some people who do require more intensive and longer term support, and that will always be the case. And that will always be the case that people do want to associate with people that have mental health issues because they feel that it's a safe place for them to associate with and they're not going to be discriminated against, and that's okay too. Like I'm certainly not saying that that's not something that isn't important for those people that that feel that that's what they need. But for me, to break down the stigma of mental health and having a mental illness, like in a way I'm out and I'm proud. It was never the case early on, and it took me 10 years to even divulge to my cricket mates that I had schizophrenia. I mean, to use that term, it took 10 years to be comfortable to say that, even though they probably knew a lot earlier and had deduced that themselves. But now, if I'm in the newspaper promoting Connecting to Community, or I'm doing what I'm doing with this opportunity today, I don't see why anyone can't be a member of their community, say that they have a mental health issue, and just be part of the community. I don't see why that should be an issue.
One of the other things that you talked about, Rick, was your dream to have some peer-led and run services. And so in terms of, if you think about the ideal, what would you like to see on the ground in terms of peer-led services?
Oh, it's been talked about in the peer workforce that if you had an organisation where from the CEO down to the support workers that it was all peer run, you use VIMIAC as an example of, like, they're an advocacy service here in Victoria, but their entire work has an experience of mental health issues. So look, if there was funding for a service where everyone in the building had a lived experience, that would be a great thing. Now, how realistic that is, I'm not sure. But when it comes to things like peer supervision and you know, that sort of stuff, I mean, I think it's important. If people feel that they need to have supervision from someone with a lived experience, then that opportunity should be afforded to them. I've been very fortunate where 3 of my managers have immediate family members who have had you know, severe and persistent mental health issues. So to me, the supervision I get, I'm satisfied with, because I know that the people that are giving me that supervision have an understanding, and a really good understanding, of mental health issues. Whereas in other, you know, organisations and maybe in more clinical settings, that may not be the case, and so people need that external peer supervision. You know, that's fine. I think it's really just a balance of you know, what suits the individual. But yeah, look, if we could have organisations that were, you know, delivering mental health services, and from the top down everyone had that lived experience, that would be great. I'm not sure how realistic that is, but you know, I think, look, as a society as a whole, we need to really break down the stigma and the belief that people with mental health issues can't perform their jobs properly or to the same degree as other people, because I just don't think that's right.
And I think that's certainly, we did visit a peer-led and run service in New Zealand, and we have recommended the beginning of that here in Victoria. And I think we see that there's a great role they can play in complementing other services. And so I think your point is so important, because that issue of the stigma around people with mental illness, that view that people with mental illness can't make that contribution that you've described, is something that we need to break down. And just like you were saying, role modelling is really important to other people with lived experience to give them hope. I think also us putting that investment in some peer-led services is also very important, because it also gives people that recognition and support. So I think that was a very helpful observation that you made in terms of that. I guess you also described, Rick, on your journey, keeping the work-life balance has been pretty important. So you working somewhere where they allow you to work part-time, be flexible with your work. Is that well accepted in your services, that that's important? Did it come out in the co-design work about how to keep that balance for people between work and life and managing their ongoing health issues?
Look, I'm pleasantly surprised at how many people at Ballarat Community Health actually work part-time. There's plenty of people that work here full-time, but there's also plenty of people that do work here 3 and 4 days a week, or maybe 2 days a week. I think the important thing to probably recognise, it is a bit of a taboo subject. I think there's a lot of belief that people with mental health issues are really only a part-time workforce, and that they want to work 5 days a week, but those opportunities aren't there in the lived experience workforce. But I think for some it is a work-life balance, like myself, that don't want to work full-time. But I don't see any reason, if someone wants to work 5 days a week and be in a lived experience role, that those opportunities should be there as well. And look, I'm not one that is striving to climb into a management position. I don't think personally for me that I would cope with that added pressure. I'm quite happy in a senior role, mentoring the more junior peer workers, and that's been a learning curve for me, even in the last 12 months doing that. But for others that would like to work 5 days a week and get into management positions, then good luck to them, and I don't see why they shouldn't be given those opportunities. Now, if that means that it's in an organisation that has a full lived experience workforce, and that's the way that it is, that's fine. But I don't see, I'm sure if I sort of had the aspirations to be the manager of the adult mental health team, my lived experience wouldn't be a barrier towards me getting that role, if that's what I aspired to.
It's a pretty good progress that's been made in a relatively short period of time in recognition of the importance of this workforce and the contribution that can be made. And so it's certainly a very important part of the future of the mental health system. And I think that the value and importance of peer work has been brought to our attention in so many different ways about what we need to do with this evolving workforce, which I think is how you also categorised it, as what we need to do to support its role into the future, because not everyone will be as self-motivated as you were to go to that university and enrol yourself and prove your mentor that you could do that. But we need to also really encourage this workforce, and I know that that's something VIMIAC and others are also advocating for very strongly. So Rick, could you just, in this COVID environment, given that you've been doing your peer work and thinking about what you've been doing, are there any reflections you've got on that? I know it's not in the witness statement, but just in terms of what you think is important, is what's the good and the bad of what you've had to do in terms of working remotely for these past weeks?
So look, I think we've adapted quite well. We've offered our clients, if they have the technology, that we can Zoom in and have sessions with our clients, which quite a few have taken that opportunity. Obviously, we're in a bit of a holding pattern now, so our 6 sessions aren't really counting towards, getting someone into the community. We're just sort of offering that fortnightly catch up, whether it be by telephone or by Zoom, to keep in touch with our clients and check on their mental health well-being. Look, I think the message that we try and get across to our clients is that we're all in this together. We're all in lockdown, and it's we're all dealing with the isolation, and it's all foreign to us. And I think some people are really struggling, especially when they've got probably 4 school-age children that are now at home and driving their parents mad because they're bored and can't go out anywhere. And it's really just about sort of hanging in there, I think, and providing that hope that the lockdown's going to end or ease soon, and that we'll get back to some sort of normality. So look, unfortunately, as I said, we're in a bit of a holding pattern now, and that's just the way it is. But we've got programs like we were having a Friday drop-in session was one of the other things that we sort of came up with, and there people are now dropping in via Zoom on a Friday, and so we're really embracing this as a learning curve for us and a learning tool at Ballarat Community Health, and how can we adapt to this sort of environment, and is there some capacity maybe to offer this for some reason into the future, whatever that looks like, using that digital platform. So I think we're adapting quite well, and we've got a great sort of mental health team. We're all very proactive, but once again, that comes down to the environment that we're encouraged to, to have a go and think laterally, and come up with ideas, and sort of just have a go. And one thing I just wanted to go back to that you mentioned with regards to the interim report for the Royal Commission was about the peer workforce. And look, I really think that there's going to have to be a fair bit of thought put into if the government does sort of offer the Cert 4 in peer work, mental health, that I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that take up the opportunity to undertake that study, but there has to be jobs at the end.
Yes.
You can't, and from my experience, when I went and studied, we had 24 people that started and enrolled in the course at the beginning of the year, and there was 8 that finished. There was a natural attrition rate because some people just realised they weren't in the right frame of mind to actually complete their studies. They got derailed through personal issues that came about during the year. But there's people are going to say they want to do it and they want to get their qualifications, and they have the best of intentions of giving something back and helping. But if they manage to pass the course, that's great, but they have to have somewhere to go at the end of that. They just can't get a qualification and then hit a brick wall, and there's just not the jobs out there. So I think that really comes back to organisations, whether they're community mental health or their clinical services, that there has to be those job opportunities for people, or are we just going to set people up to really just fail?
Yes, and I think that's a very important message about encouraging people to make this as a career choice, but then making sure, as you say, there's somewhere to go. And we have been thinking about what do you do in that, in terms of are there requirements for service providers? What's the best way to do that? Because we also, it's a balance about making sure peer workers start working in environments where they're welcomed, accepted, valued for the contribution they're going to make as part of a team. And so places like your organisation that embrace it will very happily include the workforce. In other settings, we've heard from some other peer workers how they're not really included very fully as part of the care team, and so we have to look at what is the right strategy to get more of those opportunities, and that's something we're certainly looking at in terms of our final report. What is the way, the pathways that will make sure that we grow this workforce and support them well into the future? So I think that's great. I'm conscious of your time, Rick, but is there anything else finally you want to share with me before we finish up our session?
Look, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to provide the witness statement and then have this chat today. Look, I just think, the one thing that hopefully comes across is that I'm really passionate about recovery. our organisation here at Ballarat Community Health is passionate about recovery. I don't see why anyone else can't achieve what they would like to achieve, and how that looks like for them, what their goals are. If I'm sitting here doing this today, 23 years after being arrested on the Westgate Bridge, then anyone can achieve anything that they set out to do. And, look, I mean, if Mum hadn't intervened, all those years ago, and I had succeeded in ending my own life, it would have been an absolute tragedy. But, more importantly, the fact that I'm here 23 years later, kicking these goals and doing what I'm doing now, I think it's just a testimony to, what recovery is about. And, it's the gold standard of how life can change. And, look, I embrace being that role model. I want to shout it from the rooftops because it's the most powerful message that I can put out there. And, that's telling my story and contributing to, impart bits of that to other people and inspiring them that anything's possible. So that's my mantra. I'm passionate and I love doing what I'm doing, and I'm just chipping away here and having a go, and it's just fantastic. So look, I still wake up every morning just thinking how wonderful things are, and just it could have ended up so much differently. And like my mum, I mean, she went beyond and above what I thought was possible. And for her to outwit me on that day, was just testimony to her, and how much I mean to her. And look, it's just it's just a miracle.
Yeah, well, Rick, it's a pretty fantastic story that you can give us here, and very, very powerful and very moving to see how you've managed that 23-year journey, the highs and the lows of it. But now you're making a contribution well beyond yourself to our system design, and it was fabulous. I was very pleased to have the opportunity to read your witness statement. Now to see you face to face and have this conversation makes it even more powerful, and to hear your absolute enthusiasm for the role that you're playing and the hope that you're giving other people, I think is really fantastic and is a great inspiration. I think if other people can see that someone can manage their illness in the way that you clearly have, manage your ongoing health and well-being, and then still contribute back to the broader community in the way you are, it's a great, great case study of what can be done through hope and resilience and the support that you've talked about having, but now the support you're giving to other people. So thank you ever so much for sharing it with us. We'll proudly put your witness statement and our video up on our website, and it will be a very important contribution to the work of the Commission. So thank you. And Phil in the background, thank you very much for facilitating all of this, and it's been a great conversation. So